So we've been discussing that breathing is the key. That's the name of this lecture series. I like to call this the new science of breathing as well. Um, it's not all that new. There have been different people throughout the 1900s that implemented programs that are very similar breathing concepts that are emerging today because of some popular books that have come out and some breakthroughs in performance, athletic performance in particular. And I want to just briefly go through those names and who they are, but I also don't want us to forget that long before these books I'm about to show you came out 15 years ago, our own Denise Campbell started experimenting with capnography in her clinic and measuring CO2 levels and addressing that. So we have a pioneer within physical who's way ahead of the people I'm about to introduce in these books. But I want everyone to be familiar with those. So I'm going to share my screen here and show you these books. So here isn't exactly the screen I wanted to share, but this will work. Here we have James Nestor's book came out mid-COVID quarantine, I guess around June of 2020. And he went on a long journey, 10 years. He's a New York Times science writer. And he originally was going to write a book about divers who hold their breath. And he was interested in that, but then he decided 10 years ago that there was a much bigger topic here. And he went all over the world and started studying people what he called aeronauts. The people who were studying air, and he called them aeronauts. And the book Breath is his 10-year journey of looking at lots of different things about breathing, going back to ancient yoga techniques, yoga traditions, to more techniques like holotropic breathing, that is hyperventilation over a 2 to 4 hour period of time, where people have altered consciousness, hallucinogenic kind of experiences, which has been used and studied pretty extensively in psychology to alter chronic depression and anxiety. But it's a very in-depth introduction in that he goes to the different experts in these areas, again, that he calls aeronauts, and he discusses what they found, what they published, and it's a nice introduction. He also does an experiment with Anders Oleson, who has his own book here, but they had their sinuses plugged so that they could identify what happens when you don't breathe through your nose. And they had their noses surgically plugged with silicone for, I think, 10 days. And they, using different equipment, capnographs, equipment to measure nitric oxide levels, of course, heart rate variability, blood pressure, their sleep, their heart rate. What they were able to do is they were able to create within themselves a lot of these symptoms that I brought up before, that people who overbreathe, they have. These people went about doing it and creating the issues within themselves to study it. It is an absolute crazy idea. Neither one of them would ever consider doing it again. They could not get volunteers to do it. It would never go through an IRB because it's just not a good idea, and it's already known to be a terrible idea, but they decided to do it on themselves. So Anders Olson's book is a nice introductory text and both of these have all sorts of anecdotes as well as scientific studies. Patrick McKeown, he's a little bit further along with this. He went and studied uh, with this gentleman, Konstantin Buteyko. Dr. Buteyko was a Russian physician, probably in around the 1940s, 1950s. His blood pressure was systolic was in the 200s, diastolic was over 100. There wasn't anything they knew to do with that. He was going to die. And he started to note that he breathed very similar to a lot of the patients he was treating who were terminal patients. And he hypothesized that his problem was the way he was breathing. And one evening, he endeavored to breathe differently, breathing through his nose. His blood pressure dropped. A lot of his chronic symptoms went away over time. And he began a study in Russia, treating thousands of people and creating a lab in the 1960s in Russia, 1950s and 1960s, where they did a lot of quantitative research, looking at a lot of disease processes. And he became quite famous, but then because of just the politics in medicine at the time, he had a lot of trouble promoting what he was doing. So he, in the 1990s, Patrick McKeown, who's Irish and had terrible breathing problems his whole life that affected his concentration, ability to learn, how he performed in school. He always gives his personal story in his lectures. It's quite interesting, but he decided, he heard about Dr. Buteyko and went to Russia from Ireland in the 1990s and studied with Dr. Buteyko, and then brought back that knowledge. And he's been teaching breathing mainly initially for children, because that's when his problems started. But he did that he started with children, but then in recent years, it's gone on to sports performance, and he started doing more quantitative analysis using capnographs and oxygen saturation meters. And so his approach is also worth noting and becoming familiar with. Not to say that this is a new science, because it's not necessarily new, but many of us have heard that it takes about 20 years for things to get when they're initially promoted, for it start to be accepted into the scientific world and the medical world. The first study that I found on where they did normative values on capnographs. This is a capnograph, in case you haven't seen that video. But where they looked at normative values on capnographs was in 1996, and they came up with normative values, and they looked at people who were abnormal and what qualified as abnormal and what kind of symptoms those people had, and they had that same list of 30 different: high blood pressure, asthma, anxiety, sleep problems, chronic pain, this whole list of autonomic dysfunction. So that is what's in the popular press. But I want to remind everyone that within our own physical franchise, we have our own Denise Campbell, who will be sharing with us treatment techniques that she's been working on over the past 15 years. Quantitatively measuring, can't emphasize enough what a difference that makes. There are different clinical measures that we use: palpation, measure, assessing people's posture and looking at the quality of their breath and dysfunctional breathing, etc. But then having an objective measure using capnographs puts physical through our own Denise Campbell light years ahead. So that's a little bit where all this is coming from. So I wanted to at least make sure I gave an introduction to that.